With interest rates dropping, everyone's expecting the real estate market to rebound and rebound quickly. But there is one segment I believe will not be rebounding anytime soon, and that is condos. And while there's many segments in the real estate market, some are moving well already, some are selling quickly, but condos are lagging. And there's a reason why. And I brought in my friend Nolan Matthias to do a deep dive into the data. Why don't we take a look, Nolan?
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this because, yeah, the Canadian real estate market right now is crazy. There's markets like Calgary that are going up a ton. There's markets like Toronto's condo market, which it's going to
Scary.
get brutal for a while, it looks like, right?
Yeah,
So, I'm glad we're having this conversation and I'm glad you're getting this information out there. Now, you're a real estate investor, right? So you're one of those guys who figures out how to make money from real estate.
correct.
And we've had some conversations in the past. You've talked about pre-construction and all of that stuff. Like, tell me your thoughts on pre-construction, what they were in the last couple of years, and how that's playing out now. Like, what was your what were your beliefs on pre-construction 3 or 4 years ago when everyone got crazy about them?
My thesis on pre-construction has always been the same. And not only am I an investor myself, is I coach hundreds of other investors to do similar work that I do. And my thesis has always been that pre-construction is speculative. And if you're treating it as anything different, you're going to get burned, right? It's okay to make a bet. It's okay to be speculative. You just have to know that you might have to take a loss once in a while. That's how gambling actually works. My fundamentals are in real estate are cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, so that in times like this, when we're weathering a storm, you have the income to back it up. So now that the market has turned, people are left essentially holding the bag and taking losses, keeping properties where they don't want to, where they're negative equity, negative cash flow, and worse, losing the properties altogether.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with you. I really think buying pre-construction, and I did this in the past, and I mean this was scary times for me because I came out of university. I had an economics degree. I did a pre-construction, did really really well on it. Ironically, if I would have held it for another 6 months in 2006, I would have made another $100,000 off of it. But I also could see the storm was brewing, and I'll never forget going into a real estate office and saying to a bunch of realtors, like, the crash is coming, it's inevitable, and getting pretty much run out of the room because the realtors were like, it's not crashing. And of course, 2 years later, everything did crash.
Of course.
But at the end of the day, it's like this pre condo construction stuff, it is speculative buying. And when you're speculating, like that's the same thing as going to Vegas and playing blackjack. You better only play with an amount of money that you're willing to lose. And here's the interesting data that we're seeing coming up right now is the number of completions that are set to happen next year and the following year and the following year. This is all inventory that is going to come to market, at least a lot of it. And I don't know what the percentages are in Toronto with respect to the amount of the pre-construction condos that were bought by investors. But I have to think it's pretty high. Do you happen to know? Do you have a
Well,
prediction? Do you have a like estimate of what you think the number of those pre-construction condos that were bought by investors are?
numbers, the rule of thumbs are somewhere between 30 to 50%. Some people say 50 to 70%. I'm going right in the middle, and I usually tell people it's about half. So half of all condos are going to investors who are then turning around and renting them out, on the open market, essentially somewhat stabilizing the shortage of rental properties we have in downtown Toronto.
There's also this thought process that there isn't going to be enough renters either. And what I'm hearing from different sources throughout the industry is the builders are starting to get these properties back. A lot of these investors bought the properties under corporations, holding companies that were designed just for single property. And yeah, they're going to lose their down payments, but they don't have any personal guarantees. And these guys are just shutting down the companies, handing back the properties to the builders. The builders have zero recourse, and there's actually more inventory sitting there than what's coming to market. And the numbers this last couple of months with respect to new listings in condos is actually quite staggering. Have you been hearing similar sort of things?
Yeah, there's all kinds of stories of people giving their units back and essentially forfeiting their deposits or down payments that they had put up so far. So you're talking 10, 15, could be 20% of the purchase price. You're just essentially donating back to the developer. Now, I don't hear a ton of those stories, and sometimes they're overblown in the news, but I think it's happening in a small level. Most stories I hear, especially from the investors that I work with who are more liquid and who have been investing for a long time, is that they're closing on these properties essentially begrudgingly, saying, oh shit, I got to put down 20, 25, even 30%, 35% to make the bank happy with the new appraisal values. And they're just sitting there and holding the asset until some point in the future where they can sell or recover their capital, which is sad, really.
Yeah. And what do you think the timelines are going to be for somebody who's going to be sitting on these things and holding their capital?
I would be prepared for 3 to 5 years from the day you close, not from today.
Yeah. So here's a scary stat. In 2021, we bought a condo from somebody who had purchased it in 2006 in Calgary.
Hmm.
We purchased it for less than what they bought it for in 2006.
Crazy.
So 15-year runway, it got back close to what they had paid for it, but it was literally a 15-year runway for these values to come back. Now, do I think that's going to necessarily be the case in Toronto? Well, I don't know, but I definitely think that it's potentially going to be a long-term play for these investors who bought these things the last couple of years, and it's going to take 2 or 3 years for this inventory to kind of play out of the market at least. Now, if somebody's young and they want to buy a condo, you're going to be able to buy one and you're going to be able to buy it on the downswing for sure. But you're going to be sitting on it for a while. So if you're buying it, you better not be buying it with a 2 or 3 year time frame in mind. You better be having a pretty long time frame. And then this is where it gets interesting, right? Because look at the condo sales. So you go back to basically 2014,
Yep.
and the condo sales in 2014, or the only year that they were even close to being lower than they are right now, was for that brief stint in 2020 when nobody was buying houses.
Hmm.
Like, that's this chart here. The black line is today. The condo sales in Toronto have never been lower, and this is at a time when population growth's never been higher, and there should be buyers for these things, but the buyers just aren't there. What do you make of that,
Well,
Paul?
along with, excuse me, along with being a real estate investor, I'm also a real estate developer. I'm a small developer. I'm not, competing with the big boys here, but I understand the numbers behind it. Now, while let's say Nolan, you buy a single family home in Calgary or Toronto or whatever it is, and you bought it in the height of 2022, and you sell it 2 years later, maybe you break even, you sell it for 30, 40, $50,000 loss, you move on with your life. But a condo developer can't do that. They can't just sell their condo and take a loss. They go essentially go bankrupt. Every unit is gone, and the bank will not finance them, right? And they have their own minimum costs they have to maintain. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They paid X for the land, the construction costs are this, taxes, which we won't even get into here, are a huge chunk of the price of a condo. And that's not anyone's fault except you know who, right? And their profit margin is somewhere between 7 and 13%. So if values drop 10%, why would they build and only take a 3% profit margin? Why wouldn't they just delay and delay and delay and delay and delay until they can take a healthy profit margin for themselves and their investors and the bank and everybody else? Otherwise, they turn it into multifamily and do what they can to turn some profit on the property. What I'm trying to say is they don't have the leverage that you have to just take a loss. It's not possible, or they bankrupt the entire system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I don't think what people realize, because I do want to touch on the tax piece, is how much of a condo actually goes to taxes. So while the government's talking about creating affordable housing, they're also one of the biggest causes of housing not being affordable. And this is a piece of data that you've shared with me. But what people don't realize is just the city of Toronto's piece here,
Hmm.
this $30,000, this has gone up to almost $60,000 now for a one-bedroom unit, and for a two-bedroom unit, it's even higher than that. Like, it's absolute insanity. So this whole situation, just from a building perspective, is getting worse. And you're right, a lot of these developers have the ability to hold on to these properties until the market comes to them. And we're seeing the slowdown in new condo building growth, permits being requested, and everything else like that. And the reason for that is simply because they're just going to sit and wait for the market to come to it. And right now, like, it makes no sense for these condo developers to be building at a time when arguably we need the building, but also when all these units are coming online. And what's really interesting is I showed the previously the condo sales being at the lowest that they've been. Now what we're seeing the condo inventory be the highest it's been since 2014. And as you know, when you start to get higher levels of inventory and then you start to see sales drop, that affects what's called the sales to new listing ratio. And the higher the sales to new listing ratio goes, the more it becomes a buyer's market and the more you're going to see declines in housing prices. So you've got this massive amount of inventory, you've got no buyers. That's a huge market shift. That's often what leads to a correction. And when that leads to a correction, that's when you see a pretty significant drop in prices. So I don't think that there's good news around the corner for the condo market in Toronto.
Mostly because they're essentially kicking the can down the road with prices. Because, like we just talked about, they can't just arbitrarily drop their prices to keep the sales moving along. They need to kick the can down the road to maintain a minimum sales price, or essentially the entire project is bankrupt. So for the foreseeable future, it's going to be you're going to see condo developers keep their sale price where it needs to be, but as you've seen some articles come out, offer incentives. Get a free gold coin when you reserve your unit, or get a free lease for 3 years, or get a free furniture package. They'll give away incentives rather than lower the price, because that essentially bankrupts the whole project. And I know you've seen that come out recently.
For sure. And it's always funny because condo developers, new housing developers in general always have this thing where when the market's really good, they don't want to work with realtors, and now you're starting to see them flip, and they really want those realtor clients again, and they're willing to do anything that they can to sell these properties. So it's definitely a market shift. I mean, I think if you want to own a condo right now, you can definitely get a good deal on one. I think this is a lesson around purchasing pre-construction. If you were going to purchase a property right now in today's day and age in the Toronto area, where do you think the opportunities are, and what kind of properties would you be buying, knowing that the condo market is getting a little bit scary?
Well, let me just profile this person. Let's say they're a young person, I'll say 35 or younger, getting into moving out of their parents' home, or moving from renting into their first property. Maybe you're working somewhere near the core, you have a job down there, and you want to live there too. That's not a bad idea. But I would consider something unorthodox is rent where you want to live and own where you should, or buy where you should own. What do I mean by that? There is obviously an abundance of condo units available for rent. Pay the rent to live as conveniently as possible. But if you really want to be involved in the real estate market, buy a single family home, a semi, a townhouse, a duplex, even further away from the core, even outside of the core in some of the secondary markets around the city where it's more affordable and you can create some cash flow, and that property is going to serve you for the long term. It's going to be paying down mortgage. It's going to be appreciating. Hopefully, it's good if you do it right and you listen to guys like us. It's going to be cash flowing, all while you have the flexibility to live and rent wherever you want, change locations every year if you really want to. And if your family situation changes, you get married, you have a child, you want to move out of the core because you're sick of all the young people, at least you have an asset to back you up. You didn't wait until you're 45 to buy your first property. I know it's unorthodox, but it makes the most sense.
For sure. And I agree with you. So basically what you're saying is you're saying make sure you're in the markets that make sense. If you want to live in downtown Toronto, great. Live in downtown Toronto, but get into the market so that you aren't locked out of the market by virtue of the fact that you aren't gaining the potential gains you can get, but don't buy in the market that is going down in price. Go where
Yeah.
there's scarcity. I mean, the single family home building numbers in the suburbs of Toronto all over Canada are way down right now. I think that there's going to be this market break between entry level homes and single family homes just because of the pure lack of building that's going on in single family homes. And if you buy the right property, you get something that's a duplex or an up and down duplex where you can rent it out to two people, and then that has a separate garage that you can also rent to somebody else. It's pretty easy to get a property that can cash flow right now. well, you go and live wherever it is that you want to live that actually makes sense for your lifestyle. So I love it. Great conversation, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on your channel, and look forward to doing this again.
Thanks for doing that, Nolan. It was nice to discuss the data with someone who knows what they're talking about. And before we go, I just did a video. There are three markets in Canada that are set to have a decent sized crash in the next 6 to 12 months because of where inventory is going and how fast rates are going to come down. Check out the video right here.